welcome to Module 16.3, our very last section in our very last lecture video for Math 108. So this very last module is learning how to solve what's so-called a quadratic equation, either by square root property, complete the square, or this thing called the quadratic formula. So basically, from the last, I didn't mean to mumble too much on completing the square, but based on the procedure of completing the square, if we complete the square on this particular form, I am so sorry, did not mean to say equal to c plus c right here. If we complete a square on ax squared plus bx plus c, follow the same steps, okay? Then we actually formulate this thing called the quadratic formula. So for any quadratic equation that cannot be factored, we can actually plug it into this quadratic formula. Okay, so the quadratic formula says x is equal to negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, and then whole thing over 2 times a. Okay, so this 2a, okay, is basically what I mentioned last time. To get that middle term, b is really divided by 2a, not just 2, okay, because you also got to cancel out the a part, which I didn't really write it out. I was just kind of pointing at it a little bit. I was trying to tell you, okay, the x is the a, so we're not worried about the x part. We're just worried about the coefficient part, okay, in order to get a b. All right, so this formula comes from deriving the ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0 by completing the square. All right, so be careful now. Up top, I got two terms, okay? Both terms share the same denominator, 2a, so we need to make sure we key in our answer look just like this, okay? Now, if I don't have anything in the denominator, so we're not gonna type in a 1 down here if there's nothing there. All right, so in order to use the formula, you got to know what a is, b is, and c is. So remember now, these three terms, this quadratic equation consists of three terms. So there's ax squared plus bx plus c. So we got to figure out what a is, what b is, what c is. So a must be the coefficient for the leading term, which is 5. B is the coefficient of the second term, or the x term, which is negative 1. And C is just going to be positive 3 here. All right, so I got my A, B, and C. So let's plug it into my quadratic formula, which is x equals, okay, negative B. My B is negative 1, so I'm going to say negative B, negative times negative 1, plus minus square root of my B squared, so that's negative 1 whole thing squared, minus 4 times my A times my C, and then both those terms on the top divided by 2 times my A, which is 5. All right, so every letter I substitute, I put them in the parentheses just in case of being negative. So if you do not put a parenthesis on this negative 1, which is b squared, then the answer will come off a little bit wrong. So if you find yourself make a mistake on using the quadratic formula, is either you write it out incorrectly or you simplifying the radical incorrectly. All right, so let's simplify this. The first thing we're going to do, or the first thing I will ask you to do, is to figure out exactly what's inside the square root without entering the square root, okay? So typing exactly how we write it, negative 1 in the parentheses squared minus 4 times the A times the C. So what's inside the square root is negative 59. So negative times negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 out here is positive 1, plus minus square roots. Now, what's inside the square root turns to be negative 59, whole thing over 2 times 5 is 10. All right, 59 cannot be broken down, but this negative sign can. Square root of a negative becomes an I. So my final answer is going to be 1 plus minus square root of 59. I on the outside of the square root, whole thing over 10. So if I write this in the solution set as two separate answers, then I will put 1 minus square root of 59. Both those terms got to be over 10. So if I were you, I will probably, before I enter this whole thing, I will probably start out with a division. You know, the key on the keypad, this button on the keypad on the for the computer. Do the division first, and then you will give you a box on top, box on the bottom. Then you can enter it, comma. The other answer is 1 plus square root of 59. Make sure you put a 10 below both terms. Okay, that will be my answer. All right, and I'm going to purposely write this out. Okay, so what I highlighted here turned out to be negative 59. I will come back and visit these numbers I wrote here on the side just in a bit. All right, this one. Okay, quadratic formula. There's no way I can factor this, so I think that most of the problem I picked to do on the video cannot be factored. So my A is going to be negative 4. My B is negative 3, the coefficient of the y to the first or x to the first. My C is positive 4. All right, so this problem will be y equal, because I'm not using x, I'm using y. Negative b, so that'll be negative times negative 3, plus minus square root of my b, which is negative 3, whole thing squared, right? B squared minus 4ac. So that will be minus 4 times my a, which is negative 4, times my c, which is positive 4. Whole thing over 2 times my a, which is negative 4. All right, so when we simplify this whole answer, let's go ahead and key in what's inside the square root first. $73. So my y is negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3 plus minus square root of 73, whole thing over 2a, which is 2 times negative 4, which is negative 8. All right, this is a little bit tricky, okay? So this is it. Not all the number on the outside the square root can be reduced, so we're not going to reduce it. But when it comes to enter this into the Hawks Learning, I will recommend put this negative sign in front of the fraction. So that'll be negative 3 plus minus square root of 73, whole thing over 8, like that. Oh, not plus minus, I'm sorry. I mean just do the minus first. And then the other one, let's do negative 3 plus square root of 73, whole thing over 8, like that. Okay, so rather than enter the negative sign under the 8, let's put it in front of it. Okay, that's a little bit safer to do it that way. All right, so this one inside the radical is 73. All right, let's try this one. Got a couple more here. 3 more. All right, so this is quadratic equation again because my leading term is y squared for the equation. So let's make sure all the terms are on the same side. Okay, that's the key thing we need to do when it comes to solving quadratic equation. When we have more than 2 terms, make sure all the terms on the same side of the equal sign. So that gives me 4y squared minus 3y minus 4. Write them in descending order on the exponents. This cannot be factored. There's no way I can somehow get a 3 in the middle with a 4 and a 4 on the front and back. So a equal to 4, b equal to negative 3, c equal to negative 4. All right, so my y equals negative b. So that'll be negative 1 times negative 3 plus minus square root of my b, negative 3, whole thing squared minus 4 times my a times my c. Whole thing over 2 times a, which is 2 times 4. This almost looks just like the previous one, ain't it? Okay. Negative 3 times negative 4 times negative 4 times 4. So apparently what's inside here is going to be exactly the same, except earlier I had a negative 4 first, then positive 4. Now I got a positive 4 and a negative 4. So I'm going to end up with 73 again, I guess. All right, inside the square root is going to be 73. So my answer, y equals negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3 plus minus square root of 73, whole thing over positive 8. So in the solution set, that would just be 3 minus square root of 73, whole thing over a, comma, 3 plus square root of 73, whole thing over 8. Okay. All right. Let's try this one. Okay. This negative 7x is on the right side. Let's move it over. So that's x squared plus 7x plus 2 equal to 0. So my a is 1, b is 7, oh, sorry, c is positive 2. So x equals negative b, that will be negative times 7 in the parenthesis, plus minus square root of my b, 7, whole thing squared, minus a 4 times my a times my c, whole thing over 2 times my a. All right, let's simplify what's inside the square root first. So that's 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2. Voila, 41. So inside the square root is 41. All right, so negative 1 times positive 7 is negative 7 plus minus square root of 41, which 41 is a prime number. I can't break this down. Whole thing over 2a. So in my solution set, negative 7 minus square root of 41 over 2. The other one is negative 7. So this negative 7, this negative sign is actually belong to the 7 up top. So I'm not going to put this in the front, okay? Please don't. Just leave it up top. It will be fine. Plus square root of 41 whole thing over 2. All right. So if you put this negative sign up front, okay, then you're basically saying that negative 7 belong to everybody in the term, okay, which is not quite what's going on. This negative sign only belongs to the 7. That's why I would like you to keep it up on the numerator with the 7. All right, let's move this positive 4y over. Let's see what we can get. So that's 2y squared minus 4y minus 3. So my a is 2, b is negative 4, c is negative 3. So my y is negative b plus minus square root of my b, negative 4, whole thing squared, minus 4 times my a times my c. Okay, whole thing over 2 times my a, which is 2. Alrighty. So let's put what's inside the square root in the calculator. See what that is. To the second power, 4 times 2 times negative 3. All right, 40. Very good, 40. So inside the square root is 40. All right, so negative 1 times negative 4, that up front, let's simplify this. Positive 4 plus minus square root of 40. So let's break down this 40 here. So that will be 4 times 10. Most of y'all can kind of tell by now, which is These two will go outside as 1, 2. So that will be 4 plus 2 times square root of the 1, 2, 1, 5 stays inside, become 10. Whole thing over 2 times 2 is 4. All right. Now, what we see here is the 4, the 2, and the 4 on the outside. All three of them can be reduced, so I will reduce them by 2. So that give me 2 down here, 2 up front, and a 1 up here between the plus, minus, and square root. So I'm not going to write the 1. So I'm just going to simply write this is going to be 2 plus minus square root of 10, whole thing over 2. All right, so when I put my answer in the solution set, I will say 2 minus square root of 10. Both those turn on top over 2, comma, 2 plus square root of 10, whole thing over 2. Okay, so that's how we actually use, this is how we actually use quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. When these quadratic equations cannot be factored. All right. So do we have to do perfect square binomial? In a way, no, because perfect square binomial eventually derives our quadratic formula, and that's the reason why a lot of teachers kind of skip over completing the squares. Okay. What I mean is, do we have to complete a square when it comes to solving quadratic? The answer is really no. That's why a lot of teachers skip over completing a square. They just simply use the quadratic formula because quadratic formula come from completing the square. Now, let me go ahead and explain this real quick. Why am I writing all these numbers in purple? What's inside the square root? Because if the inside the square root turns out to be a negative, okay, then my answer contains an I. The 73 and the 41 and the 40, those 4 numbers are not perfect square numbers. So when it's not a perfect square number inside the square root, okay, then my answer will contain some sort of radical. All right, so basically what's inside this formula, b squared minus 4ac, is something called discriminant. Okay, what that means is it kind of tells you ahead of time what your answer is going to be. So if your discriminant, what you put inside the square root, is a perfect square number, like a 16, you know what I'm saying, like an 81. If it's a perfect square number, that means your final answer will have no radical. In other words, if the discriminant is a perfect square number, that means that quadratic equation is actually factorable. Okay, if the discriminant give you not perfect square numbers, that means your answer will have radical. If your discriminant is containing a negative, doesn't matter if it's negative, perfect square, or not perfect square, that means your answer will have a I with it, which is a non-real number. All right, so that will basically conclude this lecture video and conclude all Math 108 lecture video series. So we have solved many equations. Okay, go from module 9, solving linear equation, along with the fraction ones. We solved linear inequality, absolute value equation. We solved absolute value inequality. We used interval notation back in module 9. And then we move on solving quadratic equation by factoring. We solved linear equation in 2 variables in module 11. We solved one with 3 variables. We solved linear equation 2 variable with inequalities in module 11, where we had to do the graphing, shading above or below. Then we solve rational equations, those crazy looking equation problem in module 14. We solve the radical equation in module 15, and then we wrap it up solving quadratic equation again using square roots property, complete the square, and this quadratic formula. All right. So I hope you enjoyed all the lecture video series. I know sometimes it can drag a little bit. Okay. Sometimes I do tend to over-explain a little bit, but if you ever have any questions about any kind of videos, please let your instructor know so they will let me know as well. All right. Thank you for watching.